Tom. I'm Stephanie Barker, and I am the coordinator for the Kentucky Out of School Alliance. I am also the parent of two amazing and incredible children with special health care needs and multiple disabilities. For those of us joining us today who may be new to the disability world, I'll kind of get into what some of those terms mean a little later in this presentation. However, in the meantime, as an out-of-school time professional and special needs parent, I am also excited to be kicking off the Summer Learning Week about raising awareness about a group of kids who I feel are far too often forgotten when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion and access in the out-of-school time space. I am also excited to introduce you to an amazing group of special guests we have joining us today to talk about this topic. So first, we have, oops, there we go. Just making sure my thing is running here. Melissa Beck, who is the Education and Training Specialist at Kids Included Together. They're a national nonprofit dedicated to promoting acceptance of differences by teaching people how to meaningfully include children with disabilities and complex needs in out-of-school time settings. KIT is also a national partner of the National After School Association, and prior to joining KIT, Melissa was formerly the network lead for the Colorado After School Partnership. Next, we have Judith Bradley, who I'm hoping can join us today. Fingers crossed. She was having some internet connectivity issues last night as she's traveling, and so she may be calling in, and we'll kind of have to see how this goes. But anyway, Judith is the founder of Jack Be Nimble, a disability and special education advocacy organization here in Kentucky, working to raise awareness about the many barriers and issues children and youth with disabilities currently face. And last but not least, we have Ian Smith, founder of Skool Aid, an organization in Northern Kentucky that provides after school and summer and supplemental school year incentive programming to a large group of schools and organizations around the tri-state area. They also do a disability awareness program aimed at dispelling myths about persons who live with disabilities. Ian's a Northern Kentucky native, and he has over 15 years of experience working with children of all needs and abilities. So to get us started, I'm going to talk a little bit about what disability is and who we're referring to when we use the phrase children with disabilities. I'll then share with you some key facts and stats and laws as they relate to out of school time, and then turn it over to Judith to share a little bit about the critical need these children have for structured out of school time opportunities, especially following COVID-19. And if she can't join us, like I said earlier, I'm also a parent with two special needs children, so I'll be happy to share as well some stories from my personal experience. We'll then briefly touch on the important laws, and then turn it over to Melissa to talk about how we actually go about doing this work. How do we actually meaningfully include kids with disabilities in out-of-school time programs and settings, including best practices. Then we'll share some resources, and here you'll hear from Ian from Skool Aid about how his organization is working to dispel myths around disability and foster inclusion. And then finally, we'll give you about 10 minutes at the end to ask any questions you may have for our panelists. So I want to kick us off here by doing a little poll, and I'd like everyone to answer the following question here, if I can pull it up. So the question is, what percentage of children in the US do you think have a disability? And I'll give everybody about 30 seconds to answer, and then we'll go over the results. All right, I think that concludes the poll. So it looks like, I'd say about 30% of you all answered about 16 to 20%, and you're actually not far off. And actually, quite a few of you too answered more than 25%. So jump in next here. So if we go by educational definitions of disability, we know that at the national level, a little over 14% of all students ages 3 to 21 receive special education and related services as a result of being identified as a child with a disability under the Individuals with Disabilities Act. In some school districts in Kentucky that have high percentages of children living in poverty, that number soars to nearly 30%, as low-income families are estimated to be about 50% more likely to have children with special needs. It is also estimated that an additional 1.5% of students in grades K through 12 are identified as having a disability solely under Section 504. But these statistics, which are based on educational definitions of disability, which are often more narrow, typically underrepresent the true number of children with disabilities or special needs in your community. According to the National Survey of Children's Health conducted in 2020, an estimated 13.5 million kids in this country, or about 20% under the age of 18, has special health care needs. And Kentucky, along with Mississippi and West Virginia, ranks highest among the 50 states in terms of having the largest percentage of children in this category. Among this group of children, the most 6 prevalent conditions are ADD or ADHD, asthma, externalizing disorders such as behavioral conduct problems, internalizing disorders such as anxiety or depression, learning disabilities, and developmental delays. The reality is children with disabilities represents an extremely diverse group of kids with disabilities ranging from mild to severe, physical, intellectual, sensory or emotional, visible or invisible, progressive, static, or intermittent. And because there is no universally agreed upon definition of disability in children, who's included or excluded in this group varies considerably based on the definition being used. For many of us, we may think of disability in children as related to having certain health conditions such as Down syndrome, cerebral palsy, autism, etc. And this is true to some extent. Disability in children is often related to health conditions that are present at birth, such as genetic conditions or congenital defects, such as like a congenital heart defect, or associated with developmental conditions that become apparent during childhood. They can also, children with disabilities can also have them that are related to an injury, such as traumatic brain or spinal cord injuries, or they can be associated with a long-standing condition such as diabetes or obesity. However, health conditions alone do not result in disability. According to the World Health Organization, disability refers to the interaction between individuals with a health condition, for example, cerebral palsy, Down syndrome, and depression, and personal and environmental factors, such as negative attitudes, inaccessible transportation in public buildings, and limited social supports. So historically, kids with disabilities were either educated or cared for separately from their non-disabled peers, or institutionalized and not educated at all. As a result, most spaces, programs, and settings that children occupy, such as the ones pictured here, were not designed with children in mind. However, after the civil rights movement, legislation was passed ensuring that children with disabilities were allowed to participate and were accommodated in schools, programs, and settings that serve the public. Today, most students with disabilities are educated in regular school buildings, and more than half are in regular classrooms for most of the day. However, according to research by the After School Alliance and Kids Included Together, children who qualify for special education, particularly children with significant disabilities, are grossly underrepresented in out-of-school time programs and settings despite advances in inclusive programming. And to talk a little bit more about some of the barriers families with children with disabilities face in accessing childcare, out-of-school time programs, as well as the critical need they and their parents and caregivers have for such programs right now, especially coming out of the pandemic, I'd like to turn it over to Judith Bradley, our special guest from Jack Be Nimble, if she has been able to join on. Tom, do you know if she's been able to get on yet?
I have not seen Judith join on yet, unless I haven't seen her join by name. Judith, are you with us?
Yeah, I think she was going to try to call, and unless she was having issues. I'll give it just a second and see if she can join us. If not, I will be certainly happy to talk about, you know, from a personal experience, some of the issues I've experienced. This has actually been the first year. Previously, my husband and I, you know, I was working, and my husband, he was a high school teacher, and so he had summers off, and we were really fortunate to be able to, you know, have him be available for our kids over the summer. But this past year with COVID and everything, and having 2 kids with complex medical issues, he decided to step out of the classroom and take another job in the private sector. And so this summer has actually been the first summer where we've had to try to find childcare or an out of school time program for 2 kids with complex needs. And so it was an eye-opener to me. I knew, you know, both of my kids have been in, you know, preschool programs and early childcare settings, you know, since they were young. So I knew kind of some of the issues that we were going to face. But when I started looking around early on for summer programs to that they could attend so that we would have care over the summer, it was so surprising to me, the number of barriers that we faced here, even in a fairly large community such as, you know, we're in Madison County. But, you know, even though there were a number of programs available, it was really hard to find one that fit their needs and could include them. And luckily, we were able to do so. But, you know, and, you know, we don't necessarily face some of the same cost barriers that lower income families would face. And so, you know, this is why, you know, this topic, this issue, and some of what our special guests are going to talk about today is so important, because we know that kids with disabilities have been just disproportionately affected by the pandemic, have such a critical need for socialization, emotional support, the opportunity to, you know, have fun over the summer and learn when school is out. And, you know, having access to quality out of school time programs is the way we do it. Tom, do you know if Judith has been able to get on yet?
She has not.
Okay. Well, I think in that case, we will kind of move on here and see if she can join us a little later. And if not, we can certainly send some stuff out from her after the webinar if she's still having connectivity issues. Anyway, I'm just going to move on here. And now I'll talk a little bit about a topic that very few people like to talk about: laws protecting children with disabilities in out of school time settings. But if you're an out of school time provider, you need to be familiar with these laws and know which ones apply to your particular program or setting. So for community-based programs, this includes licensed childcare, any other community-based programs such as those run by a nonprofit, there are 2 federal laws that may apply to your setting. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, also just called Section 504, and the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. The type of funding your program receives determine which laws apply to your setting. So Section 504 prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in programs that receive federal funding. This typically includes public schools, government agencies, extracurricular activities, and out-of-school time programs that receive federal funding, such as 21st Century. It is an anti-discrimination civil rights law that requires the needs of children with disabilities to be met as adequately as the needs of children without disabilities. Under Section 504, a program can't deny a qualified youth the opportunity to participate, provide a child with a disability an opportunity to participate that is not equal to the opportunity of others, provide different or separate programs to children with disabilities, or otherwise limit a child in the enjoyment of any right, privilege, advantage, or other opportunity enjoyed by other children. And under the ADA, a program, and the ADA applies to programs that don't receive federal funding. So programs can't deny acceptance or enrollment to a qualified youth, make assumptions about whether a child can participate based on his or her disability or condition alone. So this means, like, if you have a child with, let's say, Down syndrome, you can't assume that all children with Down syndrome have the same, support needs and things like that. Use admissions policies that exclude children with different abilities or require children with disabilities and their families to accept accommodations they do not want. Oops, actually, I was going to talk a little bit more. The ADA also applies to, so I'll go in a little more detail, programs that serve the public regardless of the type of funding or operations. This includes schools, rec centers, child care facilities, etc. It requires programs like Section 504 to make reasonable accommodations to policies, practices, and procedures through case-by-case assessments, unless such accommodations would result in what is referred to a fundamental alteration or undue burden. And I don't want to get into the weeds too much on that, but we'll be sending out some info that goes into what all these terms mean and the laws mean in more detail for out of school time programs. And we encourage all programs to reach out to either us or attorneys if they have further questions about some of these laws. So for programs run by schools, particularly those providing academic instruction to support learning recovery during non-school hours, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, comes into play here as well. And according to some guidance issued by the U.S. Department of Education back in March 2020, essentially if a school district offers an educational opportunity to all students, then it must ensure that students with disabilities can equally participate. So now that I've gotten some of the legal stuff out of the way and background information, I want to turn it over to Melissa here from Kids Included Together to talk a little bit about more of what, how do we go about doing inclusion in out of school time.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. Just a little brief snapshot with KID is that KID strives to help the world see the ability in every child. And our organization helps others meaningfully include kids with disabilities through inclusion trainings, policy development, and sharing best practices through information and research. And the goal is that by creating inclusive environments where no child is excluded, everyone benefits. Next slide, please. And as Stephanie shared, the goal is to be able to do some snapshots on inclusive practices. And as it's snapshots, this is just an overview in 10 minutes or less. And I would encourage you to reach out and either to me or check out the resources at a later time through kit.org to get more information about inclusion. With this particular graphic, I wanted to note what inclusion is and what we strive for is the thing that is on the left, where it's dots, different colored dots in every particular space melded together. And then the three graphics that are on the right are sometimes what some out of school time programs and schools have done where they think it's inclusion, but it's really not. And I want you to pause for a moment and just to take into reflection and consideration where your program is at. Is it really at the true inclusive graphic where everyone has access to the activities and participation? Or is it that you're somewhere in that process toward inclusion, perhaps to an integrative, somewhat exclusive, or somewhat segregated program? So again, just food for thought. And again, I love these visuals as a way to move toward that best practice of inclusion, where every child has the opportunity to move, grow, achieve, succeed, and participate with their peers. Next slide, please, Stephanie. And I noticed one of the questions in the chat box is talking about funding, and regarding inclusion itself, it actually doesn't have to cost a lot of money when we talk about inclusive practices overall, and it does not have to be complicated. And sometimes we get caught up into that what ifs, or maybe using labels that predefine what we think about or how programs need to operate, and that we need to back off of that and look at each child individually and what they may need to be successful in the program. So now let's focus really on the idea of inclusion and how you do that with and for your programs to become the leads or the leaders in best practice. And it really centers around several different factors. And the first and foremost is getting the administrators on board. Thinking about your hierarchy within your organization, the administrators have to be on board with running and wanting and desiring to have an inclusive program. The second is to have inclusive admissions policies, looking at what that paperwork says, and does it outright exclude, or does it implicitly exclude, or does it outright include folks? The third is making accommodations and using assistive technology as needed for the children and or their families to access the programs in your space. The fourth is providing communication supports in a way that's effective to the parents, the family, the guardians, and the children. The fifth factor is to support positive interactions between the program and the family, as well as the staff and the children, and also negotiating positive interactions within, from peer to peer or child to child within your program at large. And then finally is establishing family professional relationships to better understand where the family is coming from so that you can better apply or guide your program for the kids in your care. Research suggests that administrators are key players in creating a successful inclusive environment for kids with disabilities. And the role of administrators is to lead the efforts to define inclusion at your respective program. How do you do this? You make disability inclusion a priority. You look at your policies, you look at your activities, you have conversations with your staff, and you make it a priority. You help define what inclusion means for your organization. This sometimes may include the age groups of the kids that are coming in, and how do you look at inclusion through that lens? You model acceptance of all participants. You're modeling acceptance of the kids, of the families, of your staff, and of your colleagues. You celebrate diversity within the organization itself. So again, you're modeling from a hierarchical perspective that then is the parallel process, so to speak, with staff and kids on the floor. And then you secure and manage resources related to different types of funding or community resources to help better serve the kids in your care. Next slide, please, Stephanie. So and I'm not for sure, Stephanie, did you include some?
Yeah, do you want me to go to your, I can have you start off on the resources first. I'll just click through them and I'll go back.
All right, right on. So
Yep,
some
here.
of the resources that we talk about, particularly with KID, is that we are an organization where you can contract or contact for paid services. And we want to include free resources for the community at large. And one of the examples that, in my opinion, is a great resource that is available to any organization out there is the self-assessment and planning tools that include this inclusion checklist for programs. So when looking at the inclusive process for the organization at large of how are we doing from an organization perspective regarding inclusion and care, check out this inclusion checklist for your programs. And this helps you go through, what do our written materials look like? What do we do regarding staff training and support? What kind of language do we use in that staff training and support? And, you know, kind of a side note here is that, do you talk about, teach and model strength-based language? And if you're not sure what that is, that might even be an add-on point in talking about inclusive opportunities for your program. So using this or getting this list from our website, Inclusion Checklist for Programs, is one example of many of the tools that we have available, because we want the world to be more inclusive for all kids. And understanding it's not about the disability. The disability itself is a label that often gets resources. So it's about the child's ability or the potential to be successful and to participate with their peer group and connect. One of the comments that Stephanie had made is in regards to COVID and how it has affected many kids with different disabilities and or challenging behavior. One of the greatest surges or needs that we have seen is the social, emotional, and learning aspect, and that kids are sometimes struggling more now to connect with kids of their age because maybe they had been at home, or their ratio group, in the out of school time setting was minimized, or you've got masks that permit or that have prevented the ability for children, particularly at an early age, to learn the nonverbal cues related to social interaction. So I would encourage you to check out the resources to help your organization be much more inclusive from the leading organizational perspective, so that as administrators, you teach staff, as administrators, you develop those relationships with your families, as administrators, you lead the parallel process that staff will then deliver on the floor with kids in your care. And again, I want to highlight this final slide related to KIT, is that these free KIT resources are available at learnonline.kit.org. And should you choose, you can put that URL in any web browser of your choice. And when you get there, you'll see welcome to the new KIT Academy, which is our new learning management software system. And then check out the About KIT free. And I believe there's like 30 or 40 resources that are available for organizations just to go in, check out, and use, again, to make your environments the most inclusive as possible. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, and we'll be available at the end for any questions related to what I've shared or other questions related to inclusion at large for kids.
All right, thanks so much, Melissa. I'm gonna go back here just a little bit. I'm sure after listening to Melissa, you all kind of want to know about, any resources that are available, including the ones Melissa has through our organization that can support this work. So the good news is that thanks to the American Rescue Plan, there's now an unprecedented amount of funding available to help programs truly build back better for children with disabilities. And to talk a little bit more about what some of the funds that are available are as part of this American Rescue Plan, and some allowable uses for programs, whether your program is a school or a community-based organization or a child care center. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Tom here, Director of the Kentucky Out of School Alliance, to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, as Stephanie mentioned, not only through the American Rescue Plan have we seen just an unprecedented amount of investment in education, but also through we're now in, I think, the third iteration of the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds, the ESSER funds. So people have started calling them ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3. So we're in ESSER 3 right now, and it truly is, just a lot of money. It's just a lot of money. In ESSER 3, Kentucky received a little over $2 billion. And a little over 1.9 billion of those dollars are going straight directly to local school districts. So one of the things that we really wanted to lift up for out of school time professionals is, unlike the first two rounds of ESSER, in ESSER 3, school districts are required to set aside 20% of those COVID relief dollars to support out of school time programs. And so when you're really looking at the spirit of the law when it comes to the education resources in the American Rescue Plan, it is really about trying to figure out who are those students who really suffered the most through COVID, who really were just knocked back on their heels and who need the support. And so, we know that students with disabilities certainly have had a lot of adverse effects due to COVID, not having as much in-person learning, not having that socialization, not having those wraparound support services that they often receive in school. And so this is certainly something that we want to see programs and school districts use some of their American Rescue Plan dollars to be able to support. One of the things, we have on our website, we have an advocacy toolkit for reaching out to those decision makers. I will say here in Kentucky, we're under a little bit of a time clock because school districts have until the end of July to submit their spending plan for their ESSER 3 dollars to the Department of Education. So, if you're an out of school time professional, if you're working at a community-based organization, I would reach out today, right after this webinar, to your school contacts, whether that's a principal, superintendent, school board members. Ask them, what's their plan right now? How are they using these dollars? How are they using the 20% set aside that's supposed to be supporting after school and summer enrichment programs? You know, are they specifically targeting students with disabilities to be able to provide additional resources? You know, for those of us who have been in this work for a long time, I've been working in out of school time programs since I was 16. I think we've been accustomed to saying, well, you know, we got to scrape, we got to borrow, we got to beg, we got to steal. Not right now. We have the resources we need. They are available to us. It's just a matter of advocating for their use for what we know is best. So again, I'll share in the chat too. Our advocacy toolkit gives you some steps on kind of how to do that. Also gives you some templates of emails to kind of send to these decision makers to say, hey, look at us, we're trying to support students, but we need your help. We need some of these dollars that you have at your disposal. So definitely don't be afraid to ask and to speak up right now, because we certainly can use these resources to make available the kind of change, the kind of support that we know so many students need right now. I'll hand it back over to Stephanie.
All right, thanks so much, Tom. Let me see where we're at here. All right, one final thing before we kick it over to Ian here is I also want to share there is an inclusion toolkit. It's free, and we'll be sending this out after the webinar as well for after school programs. It was developed by the Special Needs Inclusion Project. They're out of California. It includes, oops, sorry about that. Includes sample policies, forms, mission statements, examples and strategies of how you go about adapting and modifying program activities. It also includes sample inclusion plans that you can use as templates when you're talking to parents for the first time and trying to develop plans for a child with a disability in your program. Now I am going to turn it over to our final special guest, Ian Smith from Skool Aid, to talk a little bit about their disability awareness program.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, my name is Ian Smith. I'm the owner, CEO of Skool Aid. Essentially, we do we're an agency of teaching artists. We want to put passionate people in front of kids, people that are making music. We want them to teach music. We want artists to teach art, dancers to teach dance. Passionate people in front of kids. I think that makes a lot of difference. And what that has done is kind of led us in a lot of different ways. I started out myself 10 years ago teaching music and PE games to kids, and now we have cartoonists, we have video game designers, and the biggest thing we're here to talk about is 7 years ago we started doing a disability awareness presentation. Jake Counts is here with me. Jake, want to say hi? Yes. Thank you. And Jake and I together put together a program called the Disability Awareness Presentation, where we talk about overcoming obstacles, celebrating differences, and we get kids in chairs. We play wheelchair basketball with the kids. And I have a short video I want to show you, just kind of for you to see it. And I'm going to share my screen, and then we're going to talk about kind of why we do it. There we are. Can everybody see it? Tom, can you see my screen now?
Yep, we can.
Thank you.
Jake Counts. I have the best job in the world. I work for Skool Aid. I get to go around the schools showing children wheelchair basketball and speaking to them about disabilities. When I was 13, I acquired my disability trying to hop on a train with some friends. When I was 19 years old, I found wheelchair basketball, and that became my passion. I was able to play in the 2008 Beijing Paralympic Games. I had all these great experiences, and now that I've moved back to Northern Kentucky, I want to be able to share those experiences with the students, as well as show them my passion, which is wheelchair basketball.
The kids were so inspired by the assembly that we had as a school program here. They sat there so engrossed.
So if I push down the court, Mr. A runs into me, and I end up falling, I have to be able to get up really quick. Normally, when you meet someone different, you can be a little apprehensive. That can be a scary moment. But when you bring in the element of sport into that situation, I think it helps ease over that. It helps people become comfortable. And that's the powerful thing about our presentation. We can talk about our differences, but surrounded with something that we all love, which is sports. The minute that first kid makes a shot, you can see it on everyone's face. It kind of dawns on them. Anybody can play this sport and have a lot of fun doing it.
For more information about this program or others, please visit our website at skoolaid.com or call us at 859-630-9555.
So,
My name is Jake Counts. I have the best job in the world. I work for Skool Aid.
We're going again.
I can't get it to stop. There we go. But thanks for watching, everybody. And you know, we've been to a lot of schools over the years. Like I said, we just turned 10 in May. I've had the opportunity to work with, I guess, over 200 schools locally, and now we've taken this program on the road. You know, it kind of stopped a little bit with the pandemic, although we were doing it virtually a lot. You know, actually, we're going down to Menifee County on Friday. We've been to Bowling Green. We've been to almost down close to Paducah, and we're looking forward to working with more. Jake, you want to tell them a little bit about kind of why we do our disability awareness presentation?
Yeah, I think at the core is and this Melissa kind of alluded to this like in the very beginning when she was talking about seeing people's ability. The more we can get students and staff like seeing the people first and seeing the disability second, the easier all the little pieces fit in. Because I think a lot of it is like the willingness to put forth the effort to have like a good inclusive program. A lot of that takes buy-in from like your students, your staff, and your parents. So what we're hoping to do is be able to present disability in such a manner that students get to know me, and I have a very visual disability. It's very easy to see. So hopefully as they get a little bit more comfortable with the idea that there's a person behind all of our differences, the more willing they are to accept that. Hopefully that trickles down to the kids that are in their classroom. And yeah, and especially with like your adults and staff, they're willing to put forth that extra effort and kind of solve those problems that can be presented sometimes when you're really trying to run an inclusive program. If they're thinking of that student as an individual person first and kind of seeing those challenges that they'll have, including that child, if they're seeing that second, I think a lot of times they're a lot more effective at it. So I really like the diagram where we were looking at integration, and the programs I've seen do it most successfully. You know, Glen Swing is near and dear to my heart, which Tom and Stacy know. But you know, at that school, you really have pretty good buy-in from the students. You have a lot of the sped ed staff, like, and the after-school staff already, so it's kind of baked in, and it works really well. And you can tell they put a lot of thought into it beforehand. But anyway, what we're trying to do is just kind of hope that you know, we can get the buy-in. So then implementing a lot of the strategies that Melissa talked about is a little easier when you have everyone on board and all pulling in the same direction. So that's what I got. My face got really big on the screen for a second. It threw me off.
It did get big all of a sudden.
Yeah.
I think one of the other messages in our program that I think has lent really well to, you know, post-pandemia is just kind of, you know, staying positive through adversity. And, you know, some of the programs that we've done this summer, you know, now that we are almost post-pandemic, is, you know, to really kind of talk to kids and saying, look, you know, we're all having a hard time. And, you know, if we can be those people to kind of help support each other and be that person to kind of try to focus on the positive, I think that really, I don't know, we've always been doing that in our presentation, and it really like kind of hits home right now, I think, for everybody. So I just look forward to doing it, or continuing this program and our other programs. And I really like what Miss Beck is having to say, and I appreciate you guys having us here.
Thank you so much, Ian and Jacob, for a great presentation. Before we go into Q&A, I do have Judith Bradley from Jack Be Nimble here with us now. She was able to join over the phone, and I just want to give her just a couple minutes before we kind of get into the last 10 minutes of Q&A to talk a little bit about herself, her experience as both a parent with a child with a disability, and also somebody now running an advocacy organization to support kids with disabilities here in Kentucky. And let me see if, Judith, are you with us? If you're having a hard time unmuting from your phone, I can try to do it on my end here too. Just a second. Let's see if I got you. Oops. Tom, are you able to unmute her?
Yeah, give me just.
Yeah, I'm having an issue on my end here.
Yeah,
I think
she's unmuted.
Okay. Judith, can you, are you able to hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear
awesome.
me?
Yep, I think we're all good.
Oh, thank you. And thank you so much for your patience. I do apologize. So speaking of out of school activities, we are up on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan on Lake Michigan with my in-laws doing just that, having some out of school fun. So I apologize for not being able to connect via Zoom. And I did hear a portion of Melissa, some of Tom, and I think Ian. So first and foremost, I want to thank each of you and Stephanie for the opportunity to even just talk, but most of all for the work that you're doing, which is so desperately needed. I am the parent of a now just turned 21-year-old young adult who is, in his words, so I invited him to come, but he's having too much fun playing a game with his aunt. So Jack is his name, and he is, in his words, a person who is autistic or has disabilities. And the reason I'm opening with this is because a lot of the conversation around people first language is quite interesting to those of us who are working with young people and anyone really with disabilities. And I guess that's one of my points right off the bat, is that our experience is that not enough times are we engaging the individual as an individual in asking, who are you and how do you want to be interacted with? And I'd say that that spans not only disabilities, but all of us with varying abilities as well as disabilities. So Jack likes to point out that sometimes he feels that he is in fact disabled, and he has a number of other challenges like Tourette syndrome, and a medical challenge as well. But he also says, hey, I am autistic. This is just who I am. This is how my brain works. This is me. So I guess part of my message is that's been a lifelong struggle for us, is finding ways and places both in school and out of school for him to be accepted just for who he is. And as he has grown into young adulthood, he too is kind of figuring out how do I want to present to people, and how do I want to engage with them, and why is it that sometimes other kids didn't want to play with me or be with me, which was always a challenge. So I guess you know, we had a very challenging educational journey with him. He is also considered twice exceptional, so meaning that he also has some substantial cognitive gifts as well as deficits. So he's the kid who can do calculus in his head, can't tell you how he arrived at the problem, and struggles to tie his shoes simultaneously. So not tying shoes while he's trying to do calculus problems, but it's kind of a mix of skills, and sometimes it's challenging to know how best to meet his needs. And that actually put us, frankly, on a path of home educating for several years until high school, because we couldn't find a school that was a good fit, public or private, to meet both sets of needs. And I think that, again, this is one of the themes that I hear repeatedly and that we and other families experience repeatedly. It's because we are often just considering one of the potentially many labels. I think Melissa talked about that, and I would just echo and reiterate that one of the best things that you can do is to please look first and foremost at the individual and to ask the child, to ask the student, how do you want? What are the things you like to do? Who are you? What would you like in a friend? What kinds of activities do you enjoy? So that we're not necessarily designing things exclusively for people from the perspective of their disabilities. And along those lines, as an advocacy group, this is a lot of what we do, is working to get this message out and to ensure that the family members and educators, and of course the students themselves, are heard in the conversation. So right now I have families telling me that they have been unfortunately excluded from some of those wonderful programs that are ongoing because districts have said that they don't have staff availability to support the child in some of the summer learning and or summer fun programming. This is completely unacceptable and shouldn't be, as I think Tom mentioned, because of the additional dollars available. But it is kind of complicated, and as many of you I'm sure know, how that money gets used in reality is a little tricky because of some of the rules around maintenance of effort. But what we're finding is that parents themselves, guardians, family members can be a strong ally for you in talking with schools, in talking with districts, superintendents, principals, and sharing their experiences. So I would encourage that. I'm probably going on more than you wanted, Stephanie, so I'm sorry, but if there's some specific things that I'm not addressing that you'd like to hear, please ask. And, you know, I'm happy to take questions. We are not a direct service provider. We are an advocacy group, really engaged in the possibility of special education being transformed. And I will tell you, I get in trouble saying this, but that's okay, because I'm making some good trouble here, a la John Lewis. Ultimately, what I, as a parent, would love to see, and as an advocate, is that there be no such thing as, quote, special education, but that there just be education which is individualized to the degree that we can for each and every student. So I'm not talking about doing away with the laws that surround special ed, but what we would love as family members is for our children to be fully engaged in every aspect of school life, and that very much includes after school life and summer. We've had numerous challenges with Jack not being able to access summer camps, as an example, or one of the things you may hear less about is, in some ways, it's somewhat easier when children are younger with respect to having more options. Still, their options are limited depending on the nature of their abilities. But in general, I find that younger children do have more options if a family has the resources to access them. And resources might mean transportation. It might mean child care for another child because the parent or guardian is required to be present for a portion of the program. So those are things to take into consideration. But as our students grow and approach even middle school, fewer and fewer extracurricular opportunities exist. And I think that the programming ought not to be directed towards the students with disabilities, but towards the school cultures at large. One of the strongest friendships that my son formed was through actually through the Best Buddies program in high school. And it was another a teacher with a daughter who has Down syndrome who initiated the development of that program. But the involvement of kids in peer mentoring and peer networking programs ought not start late. It needs to be right at the beginning. So we need to be, again, in my opinion, asking for inclusion in the school day as well, because that's where a lot of these friendships get formed. And educating not only the adults, but the kids. And actually what we've found is that the children generally, at least at the younger ages, are more than willing to play with a playmate who uses a wheelchair if we have an accessible playground and if we have someone who's knowledgeable about facilitating and supporting both kids in how to access that playground and play together. And I've seen that repeatedly. Actually, I'll put in a plug for an organization that we are looking to do some partnering with called Inclusion Matters, which is based in California, but they're all about accessible playgrounds. And I think that's another place to broaden our thinking about what is inclusion and what is accessibility. I heard one gentleman just a few moments ago, I'm sorry, because I can't see anything. I'm not on the Zoom call and I don't have access to what was shown, but sometimes people find it, I guess, easier in a way to recognize and understand a disability that is obvious in a way. We've learned how to make doors wider and provide ramps for someone using a wheelchair. We are getting better, I'm glad to say, about making things like websites more accessible to people who need to use captioning or other means of participation. But we still are pretty challenged culturally when we're looking at the actual largest group of students with disabilities, and those are our kiddos with learning differences and learning disabilities, which also impact often their behavior. So I think that's another place for us to just take a look. So anyway, thank you for listening, and let me know how I can serve and how I can help. You can access our website at jackbenimble.org. And we have a lot of things under construction right now, so be patient with us. And I think that's it.
All right, thanks so much, Judith, for awesome discussion. Real quick, I know we're running short on time, but I just want to turn it over to the audience here. If you have any questions for our panelists, feel free to put them in the chat. Tom, if you've seen any that have come up since and want to kind of have one of our panelists answer, go ahead. Otherwise, I will just open it up. You can put yourself off of mute and ask a question.
Stephanie, I will bring up one that came to me in the chat, and I think maybe Melissa and Ian and Jake, if you all want to just share this question. It's about, for out of school time professionals, I think oftentimes, folks are in this work because they love working with kids. But, you do get scared about the laws and making sure that, I'm following all the regulations correctly. And, you kind of get caught up in that. And I guess just at the end of the day, like, what would you just tell people? Kind of, what's the first step to this? To not be scared about, inclusion, but how do you just kind of start off and get your mind right?
I think the main thing is just to be really, especially be creative. We're really I I think there's tons of best practices that are important to learn about and educate yourself about. But I think at the end of the day, the most important thing is just to start doing it. And you're gonna have successes and you're gonna have failures. But if you're making that attempt, you're going to learn more and you're going to become better at it. At least that's what, that's what I've seen as far as like working at a variety of different after school programs. The ones that go for it and are kind of like treat that kid like they would treat their own, and then also get value that student's experience and what they want to do. And I think that's the best place to start personally.
This is Judith. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. I would like to add to that because we do a fair amount of work around this issue, and I personally also am particularly interested in this. But you cannot go wrong by addressing the student as I'm sorry, I don't know who was just speaking, as a student first and foremost, because indeed they are. And you cannot mess up legally, really. I'm not a lawyer, but you can't get into trouble if you are in fact educating the child. I think that's where we really have gotten off track. We're prioritizing compliance with the law to the degree that it's become the destination rather than the expectation. If you are including your students and making things available to them and facilitating their access, it would be very difficult to be not complying with the IDEA and ADA laws. So I'd ask everyone to keep that in mind. That's really the bottom line. And of course, that is ultimately the point of the laws. And the other thing to remember is the laws represent a floor, not a ceiling. So there's nothing to prevent, of course, the argument of funding is one, but there's really nothing to prevent you meeting the needs of an individual child to access programming after school. I don't know. I guess I could just be a broken record on this point. I think the fear is often unnecessary and not grounded in the reality of what the laws actually say. That's again, as a non-lawyer who does a lot of work in IEP meetings and policy making and reviewing policies for compliance. I've never seen any organization be cited for actually including a child ever. But the opposite is true.
Awesome. Thank you, Judith. I just want to give Melissa just a chance to chime in here as well.
Absolutely short and sweet. It's not about special needs. It's about human needs. Meet the child, meet the youth where they're at, negotiate the education and participation that makes them be successful on their path and their journey.
Great. Thank you all. But before I hand it over to Stephanie to close us out, I do just want to go through one housekeeping item. If you have registered for our training to receive credit through ECE TRIS, we will be submitting our Zoom participant list as our sign-in for today. So don't worry about having a sign-in sheet. We will just be submitting our Zoom participant list as your sign-in. If you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to us. You have our contact information via the confirmation email you received for the training. So Stephanie, I'll hand it over to you to close us out.
All right, thanks so much, Tom. And since we're running short on time, of course, if anyone on here has any questions for either me, Tom, or any of our panelists today, don't hesitate to reach out by email. I'm going to put my email in the chat here, and I can certainly forward along any questions you might have to our panelists as well. And also, like I said earlier, we'll be sending a separate email after the webinar is over with a list of resources that have come up today during the webinar that you'll be able to access and share with your staff and anyone else working in an out of school time space. And finally, I just want to again thank all of our amazing guests and panelists for taking the time to join us today and talk about this such an important issue, especially during summer learning week. And also let everyone here know that, you know, moving forward, KYOSA is looking for any stories. If you're a parent or a caregiver of a child, a school-age child with a special need or disability, don't hesitate to reach out and share your story with us, because those stories really help shape you know, our efforts moving forward in this area as well. Again, my email is in the chat there. Email me with any questions or if you want to share your story. And again, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Take care.
Yep, thanks.